Bernie, so something you mentioned a while ago is mega trends. So, perfect seg to our next discussion point. What are some of the mega trends gaining adoption or traction in 2021? I know you've mentioned a bit about data visibility and transparency. Would love to, just go in deeper and see your opinions on all of these trends and others that I didn't mention.
Sure. Yeah. As far as, mega trends, and again, it all comes back to data and visibility. When you think about a supply chain, whether you're a freight forwarder, whether you're an importer, it really is a closed loop process. And you have an importer who's a buyer in the transaction. You have an exporter who's a seller in a transaction. But before you ever, usually the document or the first starting point is the purchase order. And when you're striking that purchase order, you really need to understand in today's mega trend, what is the true net landed cost on this? You have to have access to all of the data and information for those sanctions, for those duties, taxes, and fees, for what your freight is actually going to cost you in today's environment, and do that predictive analysis right up front. Then you want to match that with your actual landed cost, what it actually cost you, look at the difference between the two, and then gradually shrink that variance over time. So it's going to be the businesses that have the capability to be able to do those what if scenarios and can do that predictive net landed cost that are going to be the ultimate winners on this and have the most flexibility from an overall supply chain perspective. At least that's what I'm seeing on this. And we have seen an unprecedented need for additional data and information. So as I mentioned, usually what kicks this off is a purchase order, but we're seeing this back up even further from a supply chain perspective. Most every company has an NPI process, a new product introduction process, where they know that they're going to sell a product or buy a product, introduce a new product into their supply chain. We want to gather that information as soon as possible as their supply chain partner, as their freight forwarder, as their customs broker. We want that information as soon as possible, because once we have that information, we can minimize the amount of exceptions that happen in their supply chain, really improving their overall cycle time and improving, hopefully, also their cash flow by being able to look at things like duties, taxes, and fees, and really understanding where they have leverage in today's supply chain. And Jack, do you have anything?
It seems like.
Yep. Oh, sorry, Ken.
Oh, no worries at all. Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say there. You discussed a lot about data, and we know there's multiple types of data. There's like unstructured data and structured data, and we actually also have another question from the crowd over here. What initiatives do we have around data visibility and the steps to actually increase that data visibility? So maybe you could share a bit more about that.
Yeah, so one of the things on the data visibility side of this, and I mean, the industry in and of itself, as we talked about earlier, survives on a lot of emails and PDF documents. We need to get that more digitized, but a couple of ways to be able to do that. So first and foremost is we encourage the use of a product library. That is where you share with your supply chain partners. In our case here at Flexport, we basically ingest all of the part numbers as well as all of the compliance information into a product library, and then use that based on getting the product out of the country and then into a country. What that does is minimize the number of exceptions in the overall process, but what it also does is it acts as a source of truth. So when you start ingesting data like a commercial invoice, a packing list, a bill of lading, and you're actually digitizing that into the platform, you check that data against what's in the product library to make sure it's consistent and accurate. What that does is that demonstrates reasonable care, but it also establishes a very, very sound compliance program and identifies any discrepancies right up front, so you can get those worked on so that it doesn't become an exception as your supply chain is actually executing, because you don't want your product to actually show up at the port and then find out it's missing data and information. You should know about that long in advance. And being able to do these visibility functions that we talked about earlier and ingesting this data and information as early as possible into the platform allows for these mega trends that we talked about earlier, King, in terms of where we see the industry going even further, is that technology play, if you will, digitizing as much of this data as possible and then reusing it over and over again to minimize the number of exceptions, decreasing the cycle time and increasing actual cash flow.
Jack, do you want to jump in?
You want me to go back to the original question, trends, or do you want me to continue on the initial?
Let's go off of. I think there were two questions. Sorry, I went real fast over that. So two questions for you: mega trends in general, and also data and unstructured data.
So I think Bernie did a great job talking about the import side and landed costs and getting details regarding the product. I'll probably talk a little bit about what happens once the product gets into the U.S. Being able to have the warehouses, the hubs, the people. Where right now, as we live in COVID, there's outbreaks that are happening throughout the different 3PL logistics hubs, and kind of what's being done and what kind of mega trends are driving that. So two mega trends driving that area I will talk about is probably the investment within 5G IoT. So using sensors to be able to capture information, having 5G within the four walls to be able to have pinpoint accuracy within centimeters or inches of where product is placed, to be able to have faster cycle time counting a product that is once it hits the four doors of a physical warehouse, to get better visibility of how to get product out once it's actually into a particular imported warehouse or hub or distribution center, is some of the mega trends that I'm starting to see, and we at Justa is also starting to invest more heavily in. The other one I'll talk about is just the ongoing piece with outsourcing and the needs for all Fortune 500 companies. As a lot of companies have back offices, the ongoing challenges when COVID hit, a lot of those back offices really were shut down for a few days, and it really pinpointed the vulnerability towards the supply chain and the use of outsourcing. So as we look at that, ongoing investments into RPA, investments to see how to get the computers to be smarter to be able to capture the requirements, to bring that to a customer service or account manager to be able to pinpoint those information to feed it back to a customer. So as we look at that, that's probably two of the mega trends that I'll probably capture outside of the multi-sourcing or the dual sourcing strategy we mentioned. Okay. Regarding the question around kind of the piece with unstructured and structured data, I agree with the topics. Is unstructured data is relevant throughout our industry, and it's so much easier to write something handwritten on paper in the warehouses. It's so much easier than keying information in. So as we look at the end-to-end supply chain or the order-to-cash cycles, as the question from one of the audiences of how to start the process is, I think first having a good sense of what your process is from an order-to-cash cycle is the best way to start. Is figure out what your current state is, have that mapped out, look at where it's broken, where is it structured data, where is it unstructured, and starting to tackle those unstructured ones that impact more parts of the organization, not just the customs broker or supply chain, but how does that impact the finance team? How does that impact the sales team, the operations team? And that's probably where the quickest place to start is find the one that is the biggest problem for all parts of the organization, and that will be the one that gains the quickest traction to be resolved.
Yeah, Jack, you bring up a good point there. There's so many supply chains continue to get more and more complex. Just from an example perspective, I have a client I was working with that has a lead logistics provider that is supposed to do the end-to-end. And, we had a problem with the overall shipment. When we went back and tracked it, it actually had changed hands between the sending location and receiving location 34 times in the overall. So you've got all these different personas and touch points in the supply chain. So, and it continues to get more and more complex with triangular shipments and things along those lines. So the more we can look from an industry perspective towards getting it on a common platform, leveraging technology for visibility and allowing us to then be able to take action based off of milestones is really where the industry needs to go next, from an overall technology perspective. So, all the points Jack was just touching on as well. There's so many players in getting a product from point A to point B that oftentimes, we think about the leg that usually takes the longest. If it's an ocean container, it's going to be on the water for a couple of weeks. But there's all these other ancillary players that all need access to data and information. That's why leveraging the technology in a common platform is so key for businesses to be competitive and to stay competitive as the landscape continues to change.
Yeah, no, these are very interesting insights. And so, from more of a technology, and I guess given the expertise of both of you in technology, I think the crowd is interested in learning from a technology and innovation perspective what trends are enabling companies to run, and more concretely, how can they apply and leverage technology to build a more efficient supply chain.
Which one do you want to go first here? Do you want to, Jack? Do you want me to? I don't care.
I'll start first on this one, okay. Bernie. So technology trend is, I think it's similar to kind of the mega trends, right? I think Bernie talks about systems being able to talk to each other. So APIs, being able to have multiple systems or platforms being able to connect and talk to each other, I think is one of the trends that we're starting to see and really starting to gain more traction. Where traditionally in the past, if you needed to understand where your container was, your means of doing that was either calling the steamship line or calling the terminal or the port to figure out where the container was to get details around the firm's code or whether or not the container is available. I think there's a lot of different startups, a lot of different companies that have different APIs that are gathering this information that the steamship lines themselves or the carrier community does not have through API methods, more the traditional development or IT softwares that have become an enabler to connect various different platforms together to create kind of that ecosystem. So I'm definitely seeing a trend over the last few years where systems are all starting to talk to each other. People are gathering data from multiple different sources. And I think that allows the visibility, which Bernie mentioned as well, to really start getting a hold of where is my freight, where is my shipment, to really bring that smack dab in the center of everyone. Some of those cases was when COVID started, right? Is with toilet paper, everyone was probably trying to figure out where is the supply chain of the toilet papers, of the essential goods. And as funny as some of those things is, the reality was certain product, they were overstocked in certain hubs, they were understocked and selling through at different locations. So having that visibility is critical. But more than that visibility is having the ability to execute against that, right? Is once you know where your freight is or where your things are, is being able to have the customer service, the teams, the people to execute and make the shipments move in the supply chain. And no amount of digitalization that sits in today is going to match with someone picking up the phone and getting a carrier, getting a trucker to physically move the freight or pulling in favors for that. So I think there's a balance between technology trends and also the need for execution and people that are at the heart of the logistics freight forwarding industry today still. So that's kind of my thoughts around technology trends.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I know we always are going to need those war veterans that are around the world, country by country, that really understand the ins and outs and how everything works at a specific port, at a specific trade lane. But if I look at technology trends as well, there's a lot of businesses that are out there, and I know some questions have come up on this as well. There were importers as well as exporters, and their supply chain partners lack some sophistication for technology. They're not able to set up an API or get electronic information. Even a spreadsheet at times is very difficult to pull. What you should be doing then, or what we're seeing from a trend perspective, is more of a marketplace type of an environment where a lot of supply chain partners can go to a marketplace, a common area, if you will, to be able to see all of this aggregated information. And we are encouraging importers and exporters to look more towards their supply chain partners to help them from a technology perspective. So even though you might only be able to provide a PDF, but what is your supply chain partner doing with that PDF? Are they then taking that from a data perspective? Are they ingesting that into their platform? When they ingest it into their platform, are they capturing all of the data elements, for example, that's on your commercial invoice, or are they just capturing what's needed for a customs entry? Because there could be a significant variance associated with that. And as they bring that data into the platform, what are they doing to help streamline that process? Are they using artificial intelligence? Are they using machine learning? What are they doing to try and help their customers automate and ingest that information into the platform? Because what we're all about here is taking data and turning data into information, and then making that information available to everybody in the supply chain, so that we all have equal footing, but we all have that visibility and we all have access to that data, really at the part number level, as well as the shipment level, as well as the PO level, but you need it down to the part number level. And again, I think that's where we're seeing a lot of these technology trends, and we see the competitive organizations, the brokers, carriers, and freight forwarders that are more embracing that overall marketplace, where they're going to allow a lot more of the transaction sets to flow through them, so companies have and businesses have really more of a one-stop shop on a go-forward landscape perspective. That's what we're kind of seeing across the board.
So we have a lot of questions from the crowd.
I was going to say that.
Yeah, we have a lot of questions from the crowd about the exact same thing. It seems like Jack, Bernie, you've done an amazing job of selling the entire idea of digitization of data, right? But now the crowd is concerned. All right. So now, how do we actually go about doing this? Does it require huge capital expenditure? How fast does this data need to be processed, given that shipments are actually live and there might not be the ability to build out that infrastructure? Another question along the same lines from another person is, what pains did you go through in digitizing your supply chain process? So a lot of it centers around actually digitizing that first touch point of data.
Yep. So I'll take this one first, then I'll turn back over to Jack here. So with all of this, it really goes back to understanding the data and the data needs and the process triggers associated with that. So each organization, Jack said this very succinctly earlier, you have your logistics organization, you have your compliance organization, you have your finance organization, you have your marketing organization. They all have different needs for data and information. It's understanding what all of those needs are and how you can best encapsulate that into your overall supply chain, so that it then can be shared with everybody and everybody has access to that information. And I think that is one of the pieces that we continue to encourage clients to take a good look at. What is their internal reporting requirements? So don't just think about it from a supply chain execution, getting it from point A to point B. Once it gets into the country, let's say it comes into the United States, what organizations are then looking for data? What does your finance team need? What does your marketing team need? What does your sales team need? What does your order fulfillment process need? What are those data elements that they need? And then take that and kind of work backwards into your supply chain as to where you can gather that information. We're seeing a lot more companies, especially mid-market and above type companies, that are looking for their supply chains to help them, even from an accounting perspective. What was the ship from, ship to location? What plant code actually provided this? So that they can then take in that information on their side and be able to use it more fluidly without having to manipulate that data significantly on their side. There's so much information that is available. And if you just start mapping that out, and again, you can do it yourself. You can work with supply chain partners to help you map that out. But what we're seeing is more of a strategic partner relationship between the freight forwarder and the customs broker with their clients today to really help them map out that overall process, avoid some of the pitfalls we have all lived through from an overall industry perspective, and trying to make it better going forward. So, Jack?
Yeah, I would add on to those personas. I think it's great, great concept, and I highly encourage everyone on the call to really understand your organization, your ERP systems, and what's the capabilities. I think most organizations know the problems that they need to fix. It's just whether or not they have the support of management or leadership within the organization to be able to execute and be able to get executive buy-in. So I think it first starts by being able to state the problems, being able to have that order to cash cycle mapped out, and be able to then put in the personas and the different people within the organization, understand the challenges, the reporting requirements that Bernie mentioned, and then look at the supply chain partners that you work with. Where is that information today? Is it offline? Is it unstructured, or is it structured, meaning it's captured in a way? But I do think it requires work from the community to be able to put these requirements up front, to then expect from the freight forwarder or the customs broker to then be able to ask where they can get the information or how they do structure that information together. So I think that process of how to start the digital supply chain starts with first understanding your processes. And you may not know all of it. There's organizations that range from hundreds of people to tens of thousands of people. The larger the organization, the more siloed it is, the harder it is to get that information. But I do think each one of them have the requirements that has somewhere been documented, or someone's sending reports, right? As finance for the last 2 years, everyone wanted a Section 301, how much additional duties am I paying report, so they could capture it, so that they can manage cash flow better. So these requirements are there. I would encourage that to start the process. It really is to start just writing down the people who are the people in the finance organization, and have a conversation by the coffee table, or now over Zoom or Skype or whatever chatting platform, and asking them, well, hey, how does your day work, and how do you get the information, or who gives you this information? And more times than not, you'll find it's unstructured data that someone didn't capture or fat fingered into their ERP system, or didn't get fed into their ERP system correctly, that leads them to have to go after a manual report to correct the wrongs.
Jack, so another question from the crowd over here, right along the lines of what you were just talking about. The crowd says, the trend I see now is that we often already develop a digital front end, but that our back office often delivers manual work. How do you see that?
Yeah, you're halfway there, right? You have the BPO process, but you have the manual work that is just being offshore, and you're really gaining the labor savings. I think that's the big trend with RPA, having the robotic process automation be able to capture the information. I think Bernie mentioned as well, is being able to get the information in the PDFs, in the documents, being able to have those recognized, captured, and being able to have those information then fed back into the system is really where I see the the trend going, and a piece to be more competitive than traditional just back offices. Is we all see the vulnerabilities of the back offices, and I see the next trend is really looking at RPA, investing in the technology pieces with a partner.
Yeah, I echo that as well. Working with a partner, being able to get that back office information as digitized as possible. If you can't do it yourself, working with a supply chain partner to help with that overall digitization, so it gets passed back to your ERP or whatever information set you're using, whether it's homegrown. We have the technology; it exists. It's now enabling that, and as Jack really pointed out there, it's process decomposition. What do you actually need? What are your bottlenecks? What is the information? Then work backwards from that. Understand where you're not able to get that data today, and then look for ways that you can get and digitize and automate that data and information, so it flows back to automatically close out your purchase order, by way of example.